Hey everyone, it's Jody. As you surely know, it is convention time here on the show and also in the political world where the Democrats are wrapping up their convention today. We did a two-part series on notable convention moments, so go check that out. And today we bring you one of our favorite convention stories from the archives. I've heard a lot of folks name-checking this moment this week when the country is nominating its first black woman for president. People are remembering the moment 60 years ago, the 1964 speech and activism by a trailblazing black woman, Fannie Lou Hamer. So we thought we would bring you that episode that we did. It was way back in 2020, in part because this is 60 years after that speech. And as it happens, Atlantic City just dedicated a plaque on the boardwalk to commemorate Hamer's speech. So we love an anniversary. We love a plaque. We love a news peg. So good time to bring in this episode. And the other thing that's kind of a nice little tidbit is that Kellie is on this show, but you'll hear she's on as a guest. This was before she had come on as one of the full-time co-hosts, but it's really cool to hear one of her first appearances on the show, and this is such a fascinating story. So take a listen, enjoy. A reminder that we have a live show on September 13th in Boston. Tickets are available now. Okay, here we go. We'll be back with a brand new episode real soon. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, August 23rd, 1964, Fannie Lou Hamer appeared before the Credentials Committee at the Democratic National Convention. She was there as a representative of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to ask for recognition as the official delegate on behalf of the state of Mississippi. Her remarks were preempted by a speech from President Johnson, but then later rebroadcast by many of the networks. And we'll get into some of the details of that and why it matters. But suffice it to say, this stands as kind of one of the major showdowns in convention history and in the political history of the civil rights era. And we'll also use this as a chance to not just talk about this moment, but Hamer's career and legacy, the convention showdowns of the 60s, and lots more. And here to do that is, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia. Hello, Niki.
Hey, Jody.
And our special guest for today is Dr. Kellie Carter-Jackson, assistant professor at Wellesley College. Kellie, thank you for doing this.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So do we want to start painting a picture of that actual day? I mean, I called it a showdown. Correct me if you think that's too dramatic of a word. But what exactly is going on here when we have Fannie Lou Hamer trying to give remarks at the convention and then the president of the United States preempts it with a speech?
Yeah, so she had come as part of this Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was basically a challenge to the all-white Democratic Party delegate slate. And she's there to testify about the ways that the black vote has been suppressed and the violence that she has faced in trying to exercise her right to vote, which we should note, she's only known she's had that right for 2 years. Yeah. She found out when she was 44 years old that she had the right to vote. And so she's here to testify to everything that she's been through. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, President Johnson is like, I need to have a press conference. And so reporters actually throw to the press conference because they expect him to name his vice presidential running mate for the 1964 election. And instead, he goes on to let everybody know that it is the 9-month anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, which is super normal, right? Like noting that
9-month anniversaries. Yeah.
Yes.
So random.
Tell Kellie, explain why you're giving a little skeptical face here.
Well, because, okay, 9 months is completely random and unnecessary. But also, I mean, during Fannie Lou Hamer's speech, she's giving, like, the gruesome details that she has experienced as a woman, as a black woman, who was beaten by police, who was taken into custody, who basically they used other black people to beat other black people. And she talks about these really violent experiences in a lot of very specific detail. I mean, if you listen to the recording of the speech, it's very gripping to listen to. And it's quite remarkable that in this moment in 1964, you have a black woman speaking on national television talking about her experiences with state violence and violence from the police and violence against her in her attempt to vote.
Yeah. And I mean, we should also say people could watch this on TV, and she was wearing a nice dress. She was carrying her handbag. Like there was something just so compelling about her as someone who you could tell that she was an ordinary American who had shown up at this convention in order to testify to her experiences. And I think even just like seeing her make her way to the table, to the microphone to talk about her experiences was itself a powerful moment in this room full of mostly white men in suits.
Yeah. So, I think it's a reminder to some extent of how strategic and savvy civil rights organizers were about messaging and about positioning and working the media. Kellie, I wonder if you have thoughts on that, but then also sort of related to that, I'm curious about this moment where Johnson steps in. I mean, is he trying to preempt political maneuvering, or does he have a sense of just sort of the power of oratory that is at stake? And is there some larger kind of like messaging narrative that he's trying to get out ahead of? Or is it really about who's going to be the delegate at this fraught time in this sort of contested convention?
Sure. So first, I will say that civil rights activists are keenly aware of the media and of the press and how they are being covered and how they are being gazed or looked upon. So every single detail matters. Every single word matters. And I would say that they went to great lengths to carefully curate their image and their message and to make sure that they were heard and really received in a way that drew sympathy or empathy to their cause. So I think that's really important. Secondly, I would say all of the above for Johnson. I mean, I think in a lot of ways we're seeing political theater for sure. I think he is very much invested in controlling the message and making sure what is said caters to his own party line and his own, not just ideology, but platform and politics. And so he wants to make sure that nothing's being said that will detract from his own ideas and his own investments, if you will. So yeah, he definitely knows what he's doing. This is not happenstance. This is not a, oops, I forgot you were on TV. Like, he knows what's happening. And I think he's definitely intimidated by what she could say and how she might undercut or undermine what Johnson is trying to achieve.
And Johnson is so aware of the fissure lines in the Democratic Party, and he is trying to hold it together with his two hands. And I think it was maybe a month earlier when the Republicans had their convention, it had been a mess. It was clear that the Republican Party was coming apart at the seams, and Johnson wanted there to be this image of harmony and we're all on the same page and there's no friction here. And so he's trying to find ways to ultimately kind of buy off the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to say, oh, well, we'll give you a couple of at-large seats, so you'll still have a presence here. Like, we hear you, but we're not actually going to do anything real with you until at least the 1968 convention.
Can you talk a little bit more, Niki, about kind of what happened, why a credentials committee fight is so important? I mean, credentials committee, like I get bored halfway through saying the phrase credentials committee. It seems arcane, it seems like in the weeds, but also this appears to be like a major fight. So what's at stake?
Yeah, so Credentials Committee doesn't sound like must-see TV.
No, it does not.
Yeah. Well, so this was really important because there had been an effort in Mississippi in order to register Black people to vote, in order to have them represented amongst the Democratic delegates. And they were, as they always had been, shut out of the vote. And so it was this all-white slate that ends up going to the convention. And what they're doing is they're saying, okay, Credentials Committee, you get to decide which delegates represent Mississippi. Do you want it to be the delegation that got there because of voter suppression and violence? Or do you want it to be this delegation that has come together to expand the franchise, to fight for the right to vote, and that represents this freedom push within the Democratic Party? You have a choice, so make your choice. And they ultimately do.
So, Kellie, let's talk a little bit about Fannie Lou Hamer's sort of political career and her biography. I mean, I will start by saying one thing, which is Niki mentioned it, and in every biography of Fannie Lou Hamer, you read it, and you still kind of have to pause and linger and get your head around this fact that she did not know until she was in her 40s that there was even a right to vote. And it was 2 years, I think, before she's appearing at the Democrat National Convention that this happened. So, I mean, this seems like an incredibly quick political awakening and an incredibly quick rise to activism for her. So just put this in the context of her career and her legacy.
Sure. When you think about someone like Fannie Lou Hamer, she's incredible. She is a daughter of one of 20 children from a family of sharecroppers. She experiences a lot of violence growing up from white supremacists. And then also when she is a young woman, she's given a forced hysterectomy, not told that basically doctors have robbed her of ability to have children. So she has this very fraught relationship with the South and with politics and how she's navigating her world as a woman. And when she comes to SNCC and realizes, I have the ability to be able to vote, but can't vote, and wants to get involved. And it's really interesting because Fannie Lou Hamer sort of does have this rocket star rise, especially with her speech at the 1964 convention, but then also has this sort of sudden demise. And when she doesn't particularly live a very long life, when she dies, she's almost a virtual unknown within the movement. Even though Andrew Young gives a eulogy at her funeral, she's still not someone of prominence in the movement in the way that we would think of a Rosa Parks, or the way that we might think of maybe Ella Baker or Daisy Bates or someone of that stature. So she does sort of get lost in the historical sauce of how we remember Fannie Lou Hamer. And the only sort of high point moments of her life is this 1964 convention in which she is dominating all television screens, talking about her experiences. So in a lot of ways, I don't feel like Hamer's been given the credit she deserves, and that her life is so much more than this moment. But I think that's the moment that we all harp on when we think about her work and her activism.
But wait, I feel like there is a quote that she's pretty well known for that you see on T-shirts and stuff. Do you want to talk about that one?
The quote that Fannie Lou Hamer is perhaps most notably known for is, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired."
And did she actually say that?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, she actually did say that. And I feel like that has become, what she's most known for. And she had every right to be tired, that's for sure. But yeah, I hope the quote causes people to investigate more into where her weariness stems from and what she, was working against. But, she didn't create the quote, but it's definitely the one that's most attributed to her, and it's understandable why.
Hey there, it's Jody. I want to take a moment to tell you about a new podcast that I really think you would like. From the Scopes monkey trial to O.J. Simpson, trials have always made us reflect on the world we live in. History on Trial explores fascinating trials from American history. Join host Mira Hayward as she reveals the true story behind the headlines and discover how the legal battles of the past have shaped our present. Listen and subscribe to History on Trial wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
I think it's also worth adding that she ran for office on several occasions, and even after the 1964 convention. And the reason that I underscore that is once she realized that she had a right to political representation and political power, she did so much with that in such a short amount of time. She understood this as a right that she had, and she was going to use it as much as she possibly could. And there's something so powerful about that in a lot of ways, which is why I think that you're right, Kellie. She's not somebody who is often mentioned in the pantheon of civil rights leaders, and she absolutely should be.
Well, you don't get Shirley Chisholm without Fannie Lou Hamer. I mean, we credit Shirley Chisholm as the first Black congresswoman, and she is. But even without Fannie Lou Hamer's failed attempts to run for office, are we even allowed to conceptualize what a Black elected woman official looks like?
Let's go back a little bit to the convention of 64 and the effect of her remarks and then that election year. Now, I will say we've talked a little bit about how Johnson preempted this speech. I don't think it really worked, right? I mean, all the networks seemingly cut back to her remarks that night. She was all over the place, as you were saying, Kellie. Her star really rose at this point. So, at some basic level, you have a showdown between the president and someone who didn't know they had a right to vote 2 years earlier, and she ends up prevailing in some way, which is really fascinating. But give us a larger political context, Niki, of what effect her words, this effort on the part of her delegation have in 64. Does it actually change the nature of that race?
So I don't know that it changed the nature of the race that much. I mean, in some ways, she was thwarted in what she wanted. She didn't get the full seating of the delegates. But what she was able to do was she was able to make her case, and she was able to make her case to a national audience. And in the longer run, what we see happen with the Democratic Party is that the white segregationist who made up the Mississippi delegation that did get the seats in the 1964 convention, their days in the party were numbered. I don't want to paint too rosy a picture of how sort of racially progressive the Democratic Party becomes, but in the long run, Fannie Lou Hamer wins that fight. White segregationists have to go find another home for themselves. And it's 1964. Barry Goldwater, again, is the Republican nominee. He had opposed the Civil Rights Act that was signed into law earlier that summer. And so those white segregationists who get pushed out of the Democratic Party see the Republican Party as a welcoming new home.
Where can we put this in terms of Johnson? Does this moment or this year and this election at all start to fit into what some people see as a sort of political awakening for Johnson? Or, I mean, kind of how do we understand the Hamer and Johnson dynamic, Kellie?
That's a really good question. I think, and Niki can correct me if I'm wrong on this, I feel like Johnson's more of his political awakening comes with the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in Selma and the interventions that he makes in Selma that allow voting rights to actually really have change on a national level. And basically he helps to ensure that all Black people can vote by signing this legislation. So I think I would say that it precipitates his change toward moving toward this. But Selma's a big part of that. I see Selma as a really big turning point. And then the Voting Rights Act that comes shortly after that, I think is what puts Johnson on the map as a much more progressive president or a president of the civil rights movement.
Yeah, I mean, Black activists were constantly pushing Johnson. And I think that the Hamer moment comes at this really interesting time because the Civil Rights Act had passed. Hooray, equal rights for everyone. And it's very clear, even in that moment, that this has not solved all of these problems. And that's, I think, why the Voting Rights Act is so important, because it's a recognition that there is still so much more work to be done. And for a lot of white liberals, they really feel like after 1965, okay, the work has been done. Right. But that is a really important moment for Johnson because he continues to show a responsiveness, if not a complete responsiveness, a responsiveness to the calls for justice from Black activists. And he's not the driver of it, but he's the president and he makes it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So as we start to wrap up here, I mean, maybe we can talk a little bit about just conventions in general and showdowns at conventions. Obviously, this year, I don't know what kind of lessons we draw from the conventions, given how big of an asterisk there is next to it. But, I think, Niki, you and I have touched a little bit on this about how the nominating process has become much more buttoned up. Parties have had much more control. So, my instinct is to look at a moment like this and say, oh, we don't get these kinds of big fights happening at a convention anymore. A convention is no longer the place where the big fissures of a party come clashing together. Nevertheless, I was there in 2016 at both conventions where it did feel like, oh my gosh, there are real voices that are clashing here. So I'm arguing against myself, I suppose, but I'm asking, do these kinds of moments still have a place at conventions? And will we see a sort of Hamer versus Johnson showdown anytime in the future?
So there are still meaningful fights at conventions. They tend to have to do with lines in the platform, which are indications of the direction that the party is heading. You see these over abortion in the 1980s and 1990s in the Republican Party. But even in 2016, there were a lot of fights in the Democratic Party over what the platform was going to look like. And you also see in conventions where there are actually delegates, you do see booing and hissing and fights that come out on the floor when delegates who support opposing candidates clash with one another. But, a lot less than you used to. Yeah. In the 1950s and 1960s, these first televised conventions, who is going to become the nominee is still up in the air. And so these battles have much more meaning because they have a much more immediate consequence. Like, who is the nominee going to be? That, I think, is well in the past.
I mean, when you attend a convention, even, in the last couple cycles, which, as Niki is describing, is still a very buttoned up affair, there's a moment where you can tell, like, oh, the TV cameras are here. Oh, this is the primetime stuff. And it gets buttoned up. And this year, it was just everything was that. Everything was those 2 hours at previous conventions that are made for TV, where no mistakes, no nothing. And, just by nature, I think, of the medium and potentially the sort of nature of the moment, you could tell that everything was going to be that. And, it's hard to pipe in booing and hissing through Zoom. So I don't think we're going to have that anytime soon.
And there's not a lot of motivation to actually do that.
That would be amazing. If they were like, to honor the spirit of conventions past, we're just going to have one person on Zoom just like booing and storming out of the room.
With the thumbs down emoji.
We'll see. All right, we're going to leave it there. This has been great, but thank you, Nicole Hamer, as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And thanks to you, Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley.
Thanks so much for having me.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. You can follow us on social media. We're posting a bunch of stuff on Twitter and Instagram every day, moments big and small. Find us at This Day Pod. Thanks to everyone who's been reaching out with comments and potential topics. They're very much appreciated, or anything you have to say about the show, you can email us thisdaypod@gmail.com. There's also a contact form at thisdaypod.com. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
I was in jail when Matthew Evans was murdered. All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not treated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones after the hook, because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you.
Radiotopia.